Welcome back to the AI Risk Manager interview prep series from 41's Academy. Episode 2 is the technical heart of the role, model risk and the SR26 2 transition. SR26 2 replaced SR 11 7 in April 2026, and interviewers will absolutely test whether you understand what changed. Over 6 questions, we'll cover what model risk actually is, what the new guidance preserved versus shifted, how materiality based proportionality can be used well or abused, how you'd run an independent validation of a credit model, the generative AI scope gap that trips up so many candidates, and finally, a behavioral question about holding the line when a flawed model is under pressure to ship. We go from foundational to a real curveball. Let's dive in. We open episode 2 on model risk fundamentals. A model owner who builds the things doesn't necessarily know the risk vocabulary. What's tested? Can you define model risk cleanly? The potential for adverse consequences from decisions based on incorrect or misused model output. And can you name its two sources? A model can be fundamentally wrong, or it can be used wrong. Then connect it to why a regulator cares. Models drive lending, capital, fraud, and pricing decisions at scale. So a bad model is a safety and soundness issue, not a coding bug. The trap is going too technical or treating it as purely an IT problem. I'd keep it plain. Model risk is the chance the bank makes a bad decision because a model is either wrong or used the wrong way. There are really only two sources: fundamental problems in the model itself, flawed data, bad assumptions, errors and misuse, where a perfectly sound model gets applied to a problem it was never built for. The reason we manage it so seriously is scale. These models set lending, pricing, capital, and fraud decisions across millions of customers. So an error doesn't stay small, it compounds. That's why regulators treat model risk as a safety and soundness issue, not just a technical bug for the data team to clean up later. To lock in question 1, avoid the traps on the left. They are what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 2. Question 2 goes straight at recency, the series edge. SR26 2 was issued April 17, 2026 by the Fed, OCC, and FDIC, superseding SR 11 7 and SR 21 8. What's tested? Do you actually know what changed? And can you resist the overreaction that it's a teardown? The honest answer? The intellectual architecture is preserved. Effective challenge stays the core principle, and the 3 validation pillars stay: conceptual soundness, outcomes analysis, ongoing monitoring. What shifted is emphasis. Proportionality and materiality move to the center. Annual calendar-driven revalidation gives way to risk-based cadence, and it's tailored to institutions over roughly 30 billion in assets. A strong candidate says, recalibrate, don't rebuild. I tell them no, this is a recalibration, not a rebuild, and the panic is the wrong instinct. SR26 2 preserves the intellectual architecture of SR 11 7. Effective challenge is still the core governance principle, and the 3 validation pillars are intact: conceptual soundness, outcomes analysis, and ongoing monitoring. What actually changed is emphasis. Proportionality and materiality move to the center, so oversight scales to a model's risk rather than defaulting to an annual validation cycle for every model in the inventory. It's explicitly tailored to institutions over about 30 billion in assets and was issued jointly by the Fed, OCC, and FDIC. So our job is to recalibrate validation cadence and documentation to materiality, not to throw out the program we already have. To lock in question 2, avoid the traps on the left. They are what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 3. Question 3. SR26 2's proportionality is a gift and a loophole. A team wants to wave a model through as low materiality. What's tested? Can you tell real risk-based tailoring from validation avoidance wearing a materiality costume? The strong answer doesn't just accept the label. It interrogates the materiality call itself using the actual drivers: inherent risk, exposure, purpose, and reliance. A low materiality fraud model can still cause customer harm and reputational damage, even if the dollar exposure looks small. So, purpose and consequence matter, not just notional size. And lower materiality means lighter validation, but never zero. Ongoing monitoring still applies. Listen for whether they hold proportionality and rigor in tension rather than picking one. I wouldn't just accept the low materiality label. Under SR 26-2, judging materiality is exactly the second line's job to challenge. So I'd ask who rated it low and on what basis, and I'd rerun it against the real drivers: inherent risk, exposure, purpose, and reliance. A fraud model with modest dollar exposure can still cause real customer harm and reputational damage, and purpose and consequence count, not just notional size. The key principle is that proportionality lowers the intensity of validation. It never takes it to zero. Even a genuinely low materiality model still gets ongoing monitoring. And whatever we land on, I document the materiality rationale so it's defensible when an examiner asks why we tiered it down. That's the difference between risk-based tailoring and validation avoidance. To lock in question 3, avoid the traps on the left. They are what quietly sink candidates. And hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 4. Question 4 is the technical core of the role. Can the candidate actually validate, or do they just know the words? What's tested? The 3 pillars in practice. Conceptual soundness. Is the design and data appropriate? Are assumptions reasonable? Outcomes analysis. Does it perform out of sample, backtest, benchmark against alternatives? And ongoing monitoring. Does it still hold as conditions drift? And the independence piece is sharper than people think. Independence isn't just a different person. It's separate reporting lines, authority to challenge and to block, and freedom from the build team's incentives. A great answer also flags effective challenge as the through line. Watch for someone who recites pillars but can't say what independence concretely requires. I'd run it across the 3 validation pillars. First, conceptual soundness. Is the methodology appropriate for credit decisions? Are the assumptions defensible? And is the development data representative of the population we'll actually score? Second, outcomes analysis. Out of sample testing, backtesting, benchmarking against challenger models, and a hard look at where and for whom it fails. Third, ongoing monitoring. Thresholds and triggers so we catch drift as the borrower population and the economy shift instead of discovering it at the next annual review. The through line is effective challenge. And independence is the part people underestimate. It isn't just a different person signing off. It means separate reporting lines from the build team, freedom from their incentives, and the actual authority to challenge findings and block deployment if the model isn't sound. To lock in question 4, avoid the traps on the left. They're what quietly sink candidates, and hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 5. Question 5 is the signature SR26-2 curveball, the GenAI gap. SR26-2 names generative and agentic AI as models, but explicitly places them out of scope, calling them novel and rapidly evolving. The model owner is weaponizing that. What's tested? Do you understand that out of MRM scope is emphatically not out of governance scope? 3 moves. 1. The underlying credit model is still fully in scope. A GenAI explanation layer doesn't exempt the thing making the decision. 2. The explanation layer itself creates new risk. If the GenAI misstates why a customer was declined, That's a fair lending and conduct exposure, regardless of MRM scope. 3. SR26-2 directs firms to apply existing risk governance to out-of-scope systems, and the Fed has an open RFI on exactly this. A strong candidate closes the gap with a parallel framework, calmly. I'd push back calmly but firmly. Out of SR26-2 scope is not the same as out of governance scope. The guidance literally directs institutions to apply their existing risk management practices to systems it doesn't cover. Two things follow. First, the credit model underneath the assistant is fully in scope. Bolting a generative layer on top doesn't exempt the thing actually making the lending decision. Second, the explanation layer creates brand new risk. If the assistant misstates why a customer was declined, that's a fair lending and conduct exposure no matter what the scope label says. So my move is to stand up a parallel control framework for the GenAI layer, grounding, testing, human review of explanations rather than treating the gap as a free pass. And the Fed's open request for input on generative and agentic AI tells us that supervisory expectation is coming. So we get ahead of it now. To lock in question 5, avoid the traps on the left. They are what quietly sink candidates. And hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. Next up, question 6. We close episode 2 with the behavioral curveball. This is integrity under pressure. What's really being tested? Did you actually escalate or did you fold? Did you stay constructive or go to war? And did you document? A strong star answer is concrete. A specific model, a specific defect, real business pressure to ship. The candidate should show they raised it through the right channel, quantified the risk so leadership could make an informed call, proposed a path forward rather than just saying no, a conditional approval, a fix, compensating controls, and documented the decision and who owned it. The best answers acknowledge the tension honestly. The goal isn't to win, it's to make sure the risk was seen and owned by someone with the authority to accept it. Avoid the hero who blocked everything and avoid the pushover who caved. I'd answer with a real example in star form, a specific model, the specific defect I found, and why it genuinely mattered for the decisions that model was driving. The pressure was real. The business wanted to ship on a deadline. What I did first was translate the flaw into business impact, a number leadership could actually weigh instead of an abstract objection. Then, and this is the part that matters, I didn't just say no. I proposed conditional use with compensating controls and a remediation timeline so the business could keep moving without flying blind. And I documented the issue and made sure someone with real authority formally accepted or declined the residual risk. Because my job isn't to win the argument or to block everything, it's to make sure the risk is visible and owned by someone empowered to own it. To lock in question 6, avoid the traps on the left. They're what quietly sink candidates. And hit the 4 points on the right for a confident, defensible answer. That closes episode 2. In episode 3, we move to the EU AI Act and risk classification.